It's a fan feedback Friday as the LA Kings get ready to take on the Boston Bruins and get ready for a wild week ahead. That and more coming up on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube, but please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years on the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, hopefully you're still enjoying the afterglow of a Kings thrilling 3-1 win in Buffalo in the season opener on Thursday. And despite great performances from goalie Darcy Kemper and a hat trick from the captain Anze Kopitar, the Kings know they will need to be much better on Saturday in Boston in their second game of the season. Kings were outplayed for the first two periods of that game in Buffalo. They were fortunate to still be within striking distance of the Sabres and be able to pull out that win with some clutch play in the final period. We talked about it in our Thursday recap show. That performance by the LA Kings in their season opener, not a recipe for success the rest of the way, but will take the win. Head coach Jim Hiller had this to say about the game in Buffalo, quote, "We had played so well in the preseason and we were playing so tight, so this caught us off guard a little. The positive thing for us is that we didn't have a good game, and so we can play a lot better. Nobody remembers this when you get into April, when you're fighting for those last few points to try and secure a playoff spot. So we'll just take it and move on for tonight." And that was, again, head coach Jim Hiller following the win over the Buffalo Sabres. And let's be clear, Jim Hiller is not going to have some kind of big talk with the LA Kings, with his roster, because of that game in Buffalo. The Kings know they were very fortunate to come out of that game with 2 points, and they know they will have to be much better going forward. There's not going to need to be a big breakdown watching film. They know it. To a man, the Kings understand what happened in that game, but in the end, yes, they did have some clutch performances from a couple of different players and were able to get the victory. But I promise you, going forward, as Jim Hiller said, no one's going to care about the 2 points at the end of the year. The important thing is always getting the 2 points. And there will be some point, probably multiple times this year, where the Kings outplay their opponent, outshoot their opponent, and probably should beat an opponent. But for whatever reason, they'll end up losing that game because of just bad luck or a bad call that goes against them in a key moment, or maybe they go up against a hot goalie like Darcy Kemper was in the season opener. So the Kings have nothing to apologize for. These things sometimes kind of even out in the end. Like I said, there's going to be a couple of games where maybe you don't play your best, but you're able to find a way to win. And there's probably going to be a few games this season where the Kings are the better team and for whatever reason don't get the 2 points. So like I said, Kings are not going to apologize for this. They're going to take the 2 points. They're going to thank Darcy Kemper and Anze Kopitar for coming up big, and they're going to move on from it. But again, be clear. They know, the coaches know, the players know it's got to be a lot better going forward. And the Kings will take on a much better team in their next game. That's Saturday in Boston against the Bruins. And the Kings, again, much need to have a better all-around performance if they're going to improve to 2-0 on the season. Kings are expected to have the exact same lineup for game number 2 against the Bruins as they did in the season opener against the Buffalo Sabres. We will see Anze Kopitar centering the top line with Alex Laferriere and Adrian Kempe. Obviously, Kopitar was amazing in that season opener against Buffalo. Laferriere had a key play in that one with a great forecheck and pass to Kopitar to tie up the game. Adrian Kempe, not a bad game, but need a little more from him in game number 2. Philip Deneau will center the second line with Tanner Jeannot and Trevor Moore. That line was okay, but again, needs some more from them. The third line, Quentin Byfield with Kevin Fiala and Warren Foegele. I thought Byfield, for the most part, was really good. He did have a key turnover that led to the shorthanded goal for the Bruins, but overall, the overall game for Byfield I thought was strong. Got to see some more from Kevin Fiala against the Bruins and going forward. And the fourth line expected to still be Alex Turcotte, Andre Lee, and Trevor Lewis. The defensive pairings, Jordan Spence and Mikey Anderson, Kyle Burrows and Vladislav Gavrikov, Brant Clark, and Joel Edmondson. And those guys had their ups and downs in that season opener. Needed to see a better effort and execution from that group as a whole going forward. Darcy Kemper expected to get the start again in net. Likely won't see David Riddick until later on next week, which we'll talk about a little bit going forward, as it's going to be a very busy week next week for the LA Kings. But focusing on this next game against Boston, and Darcy Kemper probably can't play any better than he did against Buffalo, but looking forward to seeing what he can do against the Boston Bruins in game number 2. Now, what do we want to see from the LA Kings in game number 2? Well, obviously we want to see a win. We'd like to see the same result as we saw in Buffalo, but clearly it needs to be a much better all-around effort against the Bruins. The Kings need to start better. They need to be more physical. They need to be more polished defensively. Passes need to be cleaner. They need to skate harder. Basically, other than the goaltender and the captain of the team, everyone else just flat out needs to be better. Now, the Kings did play a pretty good third period against Buffalo, and that's why they won the game. Maybe they can take some momentum from that third period into the first period of this game against Boston, because the first two periods against Buffalo were just flat out not good enough. As for the Boston Bruins, they check in with a record of 1-1 on the young season. They lost their season opener in Florida 6-4 against the defending Stanley Cup champion Panthers. They bounced back for a 6-4 win in their home opener on Thursday night against the Montreal Canadiens. Boston does have standout goalie Jeremy Swayman back in net. He played in their last game against the Canadiens. He had been a contract holdout, missed the entire preseason, missed the season opener, but he gets signed, and now he's ready to go, and he is expected to be in net against the LA Kings on Saturday. As for the Bruins, some familiar names. If you follow the entire NHL, their star players are David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand. Currently, off-season pickup Elias Lindholm is leading them in points with 4, and Pastrnak, defenseman Charlie McAvoy, and newcomer Mark Kastelic are all tied for the team leading goals. They have 2 apiece. The Bruins are expected to be a playoff team again this season. They've made the playoffs 8 years in a row. This is obviously going to be a very good test for the LA Kings. But unlike Buffalo, where the Kings, for whatever reason, have struggled, LA actually has been pretty good in Boston. The Kings have won their last 4 games in the TD Garden, including last year's thriller, that 5-4 overtime game that you probably remember because of the way it ended. Brant Clark in the penalty box in overtime. The penalty expires. Philip Deneau throws a nice pass off the boards to Clark coming out of the penalty box. He goes in on a breakaway, scores his first NHL goal to win the game in overtime. We'd love to see another thriller and another result like that for the LA Kings this time around. But again, should be a very tough test for the Kings. Boston Bruins always are a very competitive team. Again, expected to be a playoff team again this year, and the Kings are going to have to be much, much better in game number 2 all around than they were in game number 1 to see them get a victory again. For what it's worth, and likely not much, the Kings and Bruins did meet in the preseason in Quebec, the second to last preseason game for the Kings, and LA did get a 4-1 victory. Again, I don't put much stock into that, but it's out. That's the result. The result, what was they met each other recently in a preseason game for what it's worth. It is the Kings and Bruins Saturday, 10 a.m. LA time. So have some breakfast, get up and watch the Kings. You can see the game televised locally on Bally Sports West. You can listen to the Kings radio network on the 710 ESPN radio app. This is a Kings fan feedback show here on a Friday, so we've got your emails coming up next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Do want to let you know that no matter how the last game went. Anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. You only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. So start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/locked on. Offer is only valid for a limited time. Go to Indeed.com/locked on to claim your $75 credit. All right, as mentioned, this is a Kings fan feedback show, and our first email comes from a familiar emailer. That is Scott in Simi Valley, and he says, well, it's just one game, and I hesitate to revise my forecast of being optimistic for this team, but I did want to throw a few observations your way after the Buffalo game. Kemper played unreal, so well that even I was a little surprised, but just a little, because I remember that his last stint with the Kings, I believe he was at his best for whatever reason wearing a Kings jersey. Let's not forget he just won a cup a couple years ago, and I don't even care that it was for a very strong Avalanche team. Every team that wins the cup is strong, so no one should discount Kemper's part in winning that cup. I was especially impressed with his play when Buffalo tried to open him up 5-hole. He was rock solid and technically close to perfect. Despite the added Kings grit, we saw a bunch of big, strong kids in blue jerseys outworking, outmuscling the Kings by a wide margin for most of the game. That's one thing, but Zucker clobbering Clark twice and no King went after him. That's unacceptable. Clark is quite a talent, but it seems a little naive that when it comes to the grind of the NHL season, or he seems a little naive when it comes to the grind of an NHL season. Most seasoned defensemen would have kept their arms up a bit in anticipation of a reverse hit by Zucker, which knocked Clark out of the game for the concussion protocol. The Kings need to have a no-tolerance attitude towards the opposition, banging up Clark and Turcotte for at least the first part of the season, and last night was pretty weak in that regard. I predict Brandt will be sidelined by injury unless the vets give him some schooling on protecting himself along the boards and also provide a physical deterrent. I hardly noticed Janot and Fiala. Kopi seemed ageless. Q, Lee, and Turks looked really good, and I'm really looking forward to more from them, but I'm a little disappointed in the Kings' grit players so far. Yes, Edmondson tried to snap Zucker's spine in half with a brutal cross-check before Zucker went after Clark, but I say save that snarl and stand up for the kids. The Kings added grit, but maybe not enough because the young roster in the NHL just outgritted them in Buffalo. And again, that was Scott in Simi Valley. Well, I would say, Scott, it's one game. I understand it's the only thing we can react to. But before I make any, bold judgments on, this Kings team and where they are as far as being physical, we'll wait and see. I expect to see obviously more physical play from them in Boston because frankly, there wasn't that much in Buffalo. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm not going to jump to any conclusions at this point. Now, the Kings obviously have to be better. But as I said on the recap show, it looked like, let's keep in mind, the Sabres had played 2 real games before they faced the Kings, and this was the Kings' first real game. So it did look to me like that was a factor, but we'll see. As far as the Kings sticking up for Brandt Clark, I would say there's a fine line between sticking up for teammates and just playing hard hockey. I get what you're saying, but I don't want to see, as a hockey fan, a fight after every hard hit, or even every, sometimes the young guys got to pay their dues. I didn't think that Jason Zucker, took any real dirty shot at Brandt Clark. But I will say this, you also have to remember the situation, right? The Kings were going to get a power play with a game tied 1-1 late in the third period. So that's not the time for retaliation. I know you're kind of looking at the bigger picture of things, and I get that, but you also have to look at what the game situation is. There's always time for retribution at another time if it's warranted. But the Kings didn't want to do anything to possibly lose that power play. And obviously they scored the game-winning goal with the power play after the second penalty. So you got to pick and choose your spots as well. You got to understand the game situation. If you go, you can always say, well, if you go after him, maybe there's matching minors, but maybe there's not. You're giving the referee the opportunity to make a judgment on what he sees. And sometimes they give you an extra two for, whatever reason. So in that certain specific situation, I agree with the Kings. If they felt like there was something unnecessary there, not going after Jason Zucker, taking the power play and trying to get the win, which is what they did. Our next email comes from Ed in Brea. He says, wow, what a comeback win in Buffalo. First off, I was glad that I was wrong because I had a guaranteed loss on the calendar in our season opener. The Kings historically have had nightmares in Buffalo. Thankfully, Darcy Kemper and Captain Kopitar saved the day. All offseason, I've been telling everyone, including you, the Kings have upgraded in goal. Yes, Kemper has struggled the last 2 seasons. However, he is a solid goalie, not elite Vezina level. However, some teams he just didn't fit in well, like with Minnesota and Washington. He was amazing, keeping the Kings in it with his spectacular effort. If the Kings are going to get outshot and outplayed against a team like Buffalo, the Kings will sadly miss the playoffs. Season is a marathon, not a sprint. He says, did you see the Kings are hosting the 2025 NHL draft? And actually, yes, I did. And we didn't have time to talk about it because we were obviously, when the news came down, it was right before the Kings season opener, and that game obviously took precedence over that. But yes, for those who may not have heard, or for those who even have heard, the LA Kings and the city of Los Angeles will be hosting the next NHL draft. It will not be at Crypto.com Arena. It'll be in the Peacock Theater, formerly the Microsoft Theater, formerly the Nokia Theater. It's the auditorium there in the LA Live area where they have concerts and things. It's basically a 7,000 seat auditorium. No word on when tickets might become available, but when I hear any news, I'll certainly let you know on this show. This will be the Kings. I think this is the Kings' 4th or 5th time hosting the NHL draft. I know I went to the last one that the Kings hosted at Staples Center. This is going to be the first decentralized draft. You may or may not have heard about this. The NHL is going to finally move into the, follow the footsteps of the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball, where if you have watched the NHL draft before, and you probably have, that, all of the GMs and all the scouts and everything would show up. They'd all go up on the stage. Somebody would announce the pick. The player would come down. He'd shake all their hands and give them a jersey, and they'd pose for pictures and blah, blah, blah. Well, they're not going to do that anymore. All of the general managers, all the scouting staff, they're all staying in their cities, right? If you're the Montreal Canadiens, you're staying in Montreal. If you're the Tampa Bay Lightning, you're staying in Tampa Bay. Basically, the commissioner will be up there for the first round. He will announce the pick. The player will come up. They'll shake hands. He'll put on a jersey or a hat. They'll take pictures, and then he'll go off and do some media obligations. So the NHL finally has changed how they're doing the draft. This is the first time they're going to have it this way, and it's going to be in Los Angeles. And you may ask, why are they doing it this way? Well, it's a very simple explanation. It saves money. The teams don't have to send a dozen people, put them up in a hotel, fly them out somewhere, feed them, all that kind of stuff. Now they're just staying home and doing it. So it's to save money. And frankly, I'm surprised they hadn't done it until now. But yes, the 2025 NHL draft will be in Los Angeles. If you are interested in going, you should be able to attend. As far as, again, tickets, not sure on when they'll go on sale, but when I hear something, I will definitely pass that along. Coming up, a few more emails, and we'll tell you about a wild week coming up for the Kings and how we're going to cover that wild week on this show. That is next. You're on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. How cool is that? And we love to bet on the NFL. For example, the Chargers are 3-point favorites to win in Denver against the Broncos. The over-under is at 35.5. You got college football. USC is a 3.5-point underdog at home against Penn State. This weekend, the over-under is at 50.5, and UCLA is a 3.5-point underdog also at home against Minnesota. Kind of rare, it seems like, that USC and UCLA play home games on the same day, but they are this weekend. The over-under for the UCLA-Minnesota game is at 40.5, and of course, there is hockey. The Kings are getting a 1.5 goals against the Boston Bruins, so they are underdogs. The over-under on the Kings Bruins game is 5.5. Join FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds of your favorite sports and teams on their sportsbook app, and get in on the action. You'll get a $200 bonus bet guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Our next email comes from Brian. He is in Los Alamitos, and he is a regular emailer as well. He says, lucky win against the Sabres, but I'll take it. I hope these types of wins are not the norm for the rest of the season. Would also love to see the Kings start a game strong for once. Slow starts where the Kings get outplayed for the first 10 minutes seem to have been plaguing this team for the past few seasons. Also, I was wondering whatever happened to Martin Chromiak when he first joined the Kings organization. It seemed like he had great potential to be an NHL-level goal scorer, but I haven't heard anything about him the past year. Is he more of a career NHLer like Fogimo, or is it too soon to tell whether or not he is still in the Kings' future plans? Again, thanks for all the hard work. Look forward to another season of shows. And that is from Brian in Los Alamitos. Yeah, Brian, certainly for the Kings, better starts are definitely needed. I will say if we win every game that way, if we win, if we're gonna win but not play well, I guess I'll take it. Although I think we both know that's just not going to happen. The Kings obviously have to be much better, but we'll take an ugly win when it comes along. As for Martin Chromiak, I would say it's still too soon to make a judgment on his pro career. Certainly, if you want to look for an example, a guy like Akil Thomas, I kind of thought that his time had passed, and certainly he still has a lot to prove, but he is finally getting his shot in the NHL. Maybe Martin Chromiak will at some point as well. Now, he's played basically 2 seasons in Ontario, has Martin Chromiak. He's got 15 goals in each of the last 2 seasons. Okay, but obviously not spectacular. I will say Adrian Kempe had 2 similar seasons in Ontario before finally turning pro. And then he had several okay seasons in the NHL before he finally turned into a very, very good NHL player. I'm not saying that Martin Chromiak necessarily that kind of a guy, but sometimes it does take time, and we kind of need to remind ourselves of that from time to time. Now, that said, Adrian Kempe was a former first-round pick. Martin Chromiak is a 5th-round pick. So the organization will give a player who's a former first-round pick a little more rope, if you will, than they would a 5th-round pick. But that being said, I think we need to be a little bit more patient with Martin Chromiak. That said, I do think he and a guy like Francesco Pinelli, I think they do need to show the organization. I think they need to take another step this coming season. They've had a couple of years of pro hockey. These are guys who were very good in their junior careers, as are most of these guys, if we're being honest about it. But now I think both those guys, they need to show a little bit more. But as for, you make a good point with Samuel Fogimo. Sometimes the skills don't translate from the AHL to the NHL. And I think for Fogimo in particular, I think the lesson to be learned from him is that it can't just be all about putting the puck in the net, as important as that is, because some of these guys, even though you score at the AHL level, you're probably going to be playing a bottom 6 role in the NHL, unless you're a really high draft pick. And if that's the case, you're not going to be in the AHL for very long, like we saw with Brant Clark. But they got to do more. They got to forecheck. They got to play defense. What kind of a passer is Martin Chromiak? We just look at the goals and the points a lot of times, but it's more about other things as well. And as far as Chromiak, I don't see enough of him to be able to give you an honest assessment on what are the other tools in his toolbox, but we'll just have to wait and see. As far as Martin Chromiak goes, I think, again, it's too early to tell with him, but he does need to have some other skills other than just being a guy who can put it in the net. Our final email is a quick one. It comes from Steve in Orlando, and he says, long time everydayer. It's been a while since I've emailed. I wanted to weigh in on the line names that you mentioned. I like the A team or the AAA line for the top line. I would go with the BFF line for Byfield, Fiala, and Fogel. He also said, how about the no more line? Dano, Geno, and more. Just my 2 cents. Looking forward to a fun, better than predicted season. Go Kings go, Steve in Orlando. Steve, I love the BFF line. That's great. I didn't even think about that. I like that one. That's a good one. We'll see if it sticks or not. Obviously, they need to play a little bit better going forward. The 2 Fs need to step it up, but hey, just one game. But yeah, Byfield, Fiala, and Fogel, the BFF line. I like it. I will, if I use it, Steve, you will get full credit on that. I did want to mention, for those interested, the Ontario Reign The Kings AHL affiliate is opening up the season this weekend, playing Saturday and Sunday at home against the San Jose Barracuda. So if you're looking for some in-person hockey action because the Kings are still out of town for a while, head out to Ontario and support the Reign over the weekend. Speaking of the Kings, a very busy week ahead, and I want to get you ready for what's going on in case you haven't looked ahead for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day. Coming up on Monday, we'll be recapping 2 games for the Kings because on Monday, the Kings are playing a very early morning Monday game, 10 a.m. LA time against the Ottawa Senators. And you're thinking, why are they playing a game at 10 a.m. Pacific time on a Monday? Well, Monday is Canadian Thanksgiving. So it is a special holiday game for the Ottawa Senators. That's why they're playing early. Now, I guess it's still kind of a holiday in the United States. It's Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day. It seems to me that these holidays are celebrated differently in different regions of the United States. I don't know that I don't think kids are out of school. I don't think I don't know here in California. But regardless, be prepared for that on Monday, 10 a.m. local time, Kings versus the Ottawa Senators. So we will have a post-game recap show on Monday. We'll also touch on the game over the weekend against the Boston Bruins as well. Now, the Kings are going to be playing next week 3 games in 4 days. So a very busy week for the LA Kings. So Monday against Ottawa, and then Tuesday they're off. And then they've got back-to-back games in Toronto and Montreal. So again, going to be a real busy week for the Kings. We'll have, recap shows following those games. Those are all 4 o'clock, 4:30 start times here in California. So after those games, be ready for a recap show of Locked On LA Kings coming your way. And then, of course, on Friday, we'll have our typical feedback show next week as well. So a busy week coming up for the LA Kings and for Locked On LA Kings. We hope you will be with us for every day next week and every day going forward in the season. For the fan feedback show or for anything else, if you want to send an email, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section as well. We appreciate that. We would love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday. And as always, go Kings go.